Hi, everybody. I'm back to talk about the full moon this week in Aquarius. It's happening on the 12th of August for those of us in Europe and in India and further east. And if you're in the United States or Canada, it's happening on the 11th. So nonetheless, this energy is already in effect. So we can see how it applies to all of us. I'd also like to take some time to think a little bit about how we can manage this energy, regardless of how it's affecting you. I think these are challenging times. This moon is highlighting some of those challenges. And it's good, I think, to have a sense of clarity and purpose going through all of these difficulties so that you don't feel like you're some kind of victim swept along by all of these changes. So let's see together how this all looks. Alrighty, so here we are looking at the chart for this Aquarius full moon. So I shortened it to Aqua. I want to just mention that although the sign of Aquarius is indicated by the water bearer, which is where the word Aquarius comes from, it's not a water sign. It is actually an air sign. It's ruled by the element air. And so it's definitely part of that category of sign that is about communication and connection with others through intellect and speech and learning and so on. So it's not the aqua of water, but it's the water bearer, and that's the significator of Aquarius. That's what those little waves are. Often people say, oh, they must be like sound waves or some kind of network frequency or something like that. But actually, originally, those are waves of water that are being poured from the urn of the water bearer. So let's have a look at how this is going to affect us this week and thereafter, because remember that a moon, when it's full, is a reflection of the next 2 weeks to come. It's something that is kind of stimulating us to become aware of what might have been seeded 2 weeks ago at the new moon, and what we then are moving towards in terms of anything that we might want to change or act upon as we get this culminating event in the full moon. A full moon is always an opposition between the sun and the moon. So the sun is illuminating the moon, and that's why we can see it so beautifully in the sky. The new moon is when the sun and the moon come together in the night sky, in the sky in general, and we can then barely see the moon. We can't see it within 2 or 3 days on either side of a new moon. So the sun dominates that energy. The moon is dominating the energy of a full moon. So we start with where that's happening in the chart, in the zodiac. And this is, of course, in Aquarius at 19 degrees. And this particular moon is also conjunct the ruler of this moon. So the traditional ruler of Aquarius is Saturn. The modern ruler is Uranus. And we'll look at that too. But I always focus on the traditional rulerships because I find that they give us a lot of information. And we can get extra information from what are considered to be the modern rulers. The conjunction with Saturn says to me that there's a lot of what we have come to expect in this area of life that is Aquarius is under question. It's under review. Saturn is somehow saying that it's not quite what you think it will be or what you hope it will be. When Moon comes together with Saturn, it often feels like a restriction. In terms of a birth chart, for example, when somebody has a natal moon and Saturn conjunct, that can be a feeling of isolation, emotional dryness or seriousness, especially because also the moon in Aquarius is by the rulership of Saturn. It's already a little bit like that, more intellectual, more sort of thinking about how we feel, the moon representing our emotions and our sense of the inner self, the soul, if you want to call it that, our psychology as well is ruled by the moon. And so Aquarius moons tend to be quite serious. In modern times, Aquarius is seen as a sign of people who are extremely far out and really innovative and so on. And that's definitely an aspect of it. But when somebody is far out and different, they're also marginalized. They're stepping away from what is considered to be the norm or considered to be sort of the general accepted part of society. And And so that Aquarius energy, although in the positive aspect can be seen as being innovative and cutting edge and so on, can also be quite lonely. It's lonely to be marginalized. It's lonely to be different. And Saturn here is emphasizing that there's something in our sense of what it is that we want that seems to be hard to achieve. We see the sun in Leo as representing our individual desires. The sun in Leo is very much about shining and expressing ourselves. It's about showing off in a way that doesn't have to be narcissistic. It's just saying, hey, I'm here, in a way that children do. They just show up and they show you their scribbles, and they just know that they're fabulous, and they don't expect anything less than some kind of acknowledgement. And Aquarius is very different in that regard. Aquarius is very much about finding the connection with others and finding this sense of interplay with society or with ideas, with new ways of thinking about things that are collective, that are about something that needs to move forward, not so much in the space of accepting what is, like Leo might, and being happy in that moment with that self-expression, but rather Aquarius is looking for the next thing. What's the future going to bring? How can we move this show forward? And with Saturn there, it's not always straightforward. Saturn has been in this sign since the 23rd of March, 2020. Guess what happened then? And so we've already had this sense of restriction as in terms of how we want to be collectively, a sense of needing to revise that. Saturn is about putting your ducks in a row and getting things organized in a material way, in a really practical, realistic way. Saturn is also about power and authority. Because it rules Aquarius, it's also that aspect of life which is about the submission to that authority. So where Saturn rules Capricorn, which is much more about leadership in terms of governance or power and achievements and accolades in the public sector, Saturn in Aquarius is about the workers. It's representing the proletariat. It's representing the people. And then when we look at a chart from the lens of what is happening in the world, the mundane way of looking at a chart, the moon represents people. So for us individually, our moon represents our sense of inner experience of life. It's potentially our mother as well. We can see that in the natal chart and through the moon. And then also it's our experience of our emotions and our connection to the sense of inner experience of life. Our psychology is also there, the way we think, our mind is there. In the public sphere, the moon is the people. It's the unwashed masses, the proletariat, the workers. And so in that sense, we see here a double message. When Moon and Saturn come together in Aquarius, there's some real restriction here. There's a sense of wondering what is going on amongst the people or the networks or the connections with people, as opposed to what is going on with Leo, the sun, the solar ruler, or the leaders of the world in that regal sign of Leo. And so that desire nature, the sense of I will, I can do what I like through Leo, is being reflected back through what the public wants. And so we're experiencing this very broadly in the world since really March 2023 in a very impactful way. And each time there's a lunation that comes up, each time a planet goes through Aquarius or Leo, we're reflecting on this because it's becoming it's more urgent. There's something that needs to be understood about this. This is also being impacted by the nodes, and so the nodes here squaring the full moon. We can see the North Node, for example, in still conjunct Uranus in Taurus. Is squaring it's relatively close. It's still 2 degrees away from this moon, even less than 2 degrees. Uranus is even less than 1 degree away from this moon. So something different and new is coming into this equation, something that we need to consider and reflect upon. An adjustment, a big adjustment is necessary. And we see the opposite node, the South Node or K2, is in in the sign of Scorpio. And that square aspect from Scorpio is also about revealing secrets and understanding something that may have been hidden. Scorpio is that hidden power. It's things that operate under the surface, things being revealed. And this is all tense in this grand square aspect. You can see this grand fixed cross or fixed square that is in the middle of the chart there, and that's creating a lot of tension that's requiring adjustment and change. So that's made up with two oppositions. You can see the oppositions of the nodes. That's an automatic opposition, and then the opposition of the sun and the moon along with Saturn. So we see that this square is a lot of tension, a lot of things negotiating the energy simultaneously that we need to address socially and individually. We'll look at that individually as we go forward. This tension is something of a cycle that is not new. It's something that comes up periodically. This particular moment in time, of course, has its own configuration because, of course, not all the planets are in the same place as other times when these kinds of grand crosses have happened in the past. So we're still living through a moment that's exceptional in terms of the specific quality of the moments, but it's also something that's been done before. These are natural evolutions through society. All of the changes that have brought us to where we are in our modern life have come through massive upheavals and suffering and overturning what had gone before. Even if you think, are you driving a car, using some kind of vehicle, or cooking with gas? Are you using petroleum in any way through plastic, or even some people put it on their skin through healthcare products, God help you. This use of petroleum is what? That's coming from the bodies, literally, of dinosaurs who were rendered extinct by one of the great mass extinctions of a previous era. So this massive transformation has made possible the life that we're living now. And I think it's really helpful to keep these big cycles in mind. We think that we've come to some kind of pinnacle of society, a pinnacle of our culture, a pinnacle of knowledge. Every culture thinks that as they go through these bigger cycles. And yet we have to acknowledge that they've also come to an end. These previous cultures, these previous eras have come to an end. We are at this point now where we're starting to see the cracks in this era. So obviously this is not to traumatize or frighten anyone. On the contrary, my idea is to try and build resilience to all of this change. And so recognizing where we can be strong and resilient is going to be much more helpful. And building that resilience comes from an awareness. It comes from a new mindset. So it's clear that things are happening in such a way that we're being shifted, we're being changed necessarily in a way that we have to accommodate. And yet that is something that we can learn from, we can grow from. And when you understand there's a spiritual message, there's a spiritual growth possible in all of this change, then really we can make the best of it, even in the harshest of times, even in the most challenging times. So I want to bring in some ideas here that are coming from the philosophy of Stoicism. So many of you will have been familiar with this idea of being stoic, being powerful and steadfast through difficulties, through adversity. So Stoicism shows us a lot of wisdom in terms of dealing with adversity, dealing with things that come up in a way that we don't really feel comfortable with. It's similar to Buddhism. It came in the centuries afterwards, after the life of the Buddha, after the knowledge that was shared through the Buddha. But there are certain refinements that come from a more philosophical bent, whereas the Buddha went right to the heart of what it meant to be human and our delusions, our mental delusions. The advantage of working through Stoicism, at least in the beginning, to understand life, is that we are still relating to the material world. We're still relating to the fabric of society and the things that we have to touch and feel and deal with every day. Whereas Buddhism goes much beyond that, much deeper, and some people are just not able to make that leap. So one of there are four basic virtues of Stoicism. And of course, the first one is wisdom, this knowledge, this understanding that helps us to choose how we respond to whatever is going on. And then keeping the awareness of how we are being triggered on the inside, how we are dealing with what is coming from the inside experience or our inner awareness, and how that's affecting what is on the outside. And rather than triggering our need or our desire, our habit energy, perhaps, of dealing with the outer stuff, we're being asked to focus inward on how to deal with what's coming from our own response to that. And we realize that's where our real power lies. Our mind is very powerful, and we have power over the mind if we put our attention there. And if you remember this, you will always be strong. You will always be resilient. Courage is another virtue of Stoicism. And having courage means that fortitude, that capacity to persist through adversity, just keep going, one foot in front of the other. Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, just keep going. Don't stop and contemplate it. Don't focus on it. Keep going. Walk through. Things like that are really helpful to remind yourself when you're going through change, when you're going through events or situations in life that might be challenging. Then it's worth remembering it's just something that's changing. It's not the end of you. It's something around you that is changing, and you are there experiencing all of it in your permanent awareness. Temperance as well is a Stoic quality. That's a sense of self-control. So that's something that we don't really acknowledge in our modern life. The idea of self-control is a bit lost on us. Often people think of that as control coming from the outside. And this is where the Aquarius energy has lost the plot a little bit, where Aquarius energy in modern times has gone way far out, meaning I get to do whatever I want. I get to let my freak flag fly and all that stuff, which is lovely. It's a wonderful individualistic expression within society. But at a certain point, Saturn says, don't let that impinge on somebody else. So if what you're doing is really good for you and you're bringing out the best of you and you're really shining and letting your freak flag fly, then that's great. But once that starts to affect the quality of life of somebody else, and I'm not the judgment or the opinion of somebody else, that's a different story, but really affecting the quality of life of somebody else, then we have to address Saturn. Then Saturn comes in and says, hang on a minute, there's limits to this. And so this is where this moon is showing this up potentially in our life as well. So where have we been perhaps exaggerating, going too far towards the Uranian energy of Aquarius and not applying the Saturnian energy, which says, are you being realistic? Are you aware of what it is that you're contributing to and what it is that you're doing? So it's not always about going forward and expanding. One example of that more Uranian aspect of Aquarius would be, for example, putting people on Mars, moving people into some kind of Martian colony as a way of somehow bypassing the mess that we've created here on Earth. And Saturn would be saying, hang on a minute, don't you think you should put your own house in order, restructure things here on Earth, where we have the technology, the nature and the biosphere that supports all of life, before we start to break the barriers, go through this intellectual semi sort of antisocial way of pushing the boundaries of science, which is very Aquarius. The boundaries of science are that idea of Aquarian intellect and know-it-all kind of quality that can actually be a little bit negative. It can be something that can actually be harmful for the fabric of society. So just recognizing what is it that I might be doing in my life that might be a little bit too chaotic or not really focusing in on what's actually going to be good in my long-term best interests and those of the people and society around me, Where is it that I need to maybe make more sense of this? And we'll have a look at that sign by sign as we go forward. So it's really about that capacity to recognize that Leo passion and that the potential for greed as well, because Leo can be quite self-centered as well, that energy of wanting it all, wanting to show off, wanting to be seen, having it all, having my cake and eating it too. And Saturn is over there with the moon saying, hang on a minute, I don't think that's going to work in the big picture in the long term. So temperance, one of these really fundamental qualities that allows us to live in harmony. So we don't want to see temperance as something that is self-denying. Rather, it's accounting for the needs of everyone, including nature, including all other forms of life. So if we only focus in on the negative qualities, or the sense that, Stoicism or similar philosophies, or even Buddhist philosophy for that matter, is self-denying, it's not understanding the rich teaching behind it. It's a misuse of that philosophy. And then justice is the fourth quality, the fourth virtue of Stoicism. Justice and fairness. It's really important when you're living in society that there be a solid reference to justice. This is kind of falling apart in the last couple of decades, where even in countries which used to boast being the sort of flag bearer for justice and fairness, are now kind of making up rules as they go along, and they're no longer following their own laws. They're no longer following their own constitutions. We see this broadly across the world, not just in certain countries, but really in so many places, where we're starting to recognize that the ideas of justice and fairness are only used when convenient to those in power. So here again, we have that axis between Leo and Aquarius, Leo being the king, the power agent, the ruler, and Aquarius being the masses. And so here again, very strongly highlighted, even this week, we see, I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I try to look at things from a distance and from a purely pragmatic point of view. And I recognize that now Trump has been, his private home has been overrun by FBI agents who were seeking out documents that were supposed to be held by the government, or I think it's the archives, the public archives that Trump has brought with him to his home. And it's one thing is the aspect of that being right or wrong. So clearly he's done something that is against the tradition, although he's not the first president to do that, it has to be said. But at the same time, it's also important to understand that he has been, his rights and the Constitution itself are being overridden in this event. So on the one hand, people are very excited about this idea that Trump is somehow being called to justice. But the question is, which justice? Whose justice is this? Is it the justice of the Constitution and the actual written law? Or is this the justice of politics, where people want to seek revenge? And once that starts to happen, it's very difficult to know where it stops. So with whom does it stop? That if people can start to overrun different aspects of the law, we are all very vulnerable. And this is happening around the world. Julian Assange is another case of this. Very egregious abuse of human rights and international law, and even the application of American law, which is accusing him of treason, regardless of the fact that he's even an Australian citizen and cannot be treasonous against the United States. So we have to start to understand how these things apply to all of us, and finding a truth in our own understanding of the laws of nature, our natural justice, that is about the good of everyone and not for selfish or political purposes. So again, here's a really interesting polarity between Aquarius and Leo. And so Stoicism is the ultimate Saturnian kind of energy. It's the ultimate Saturnian sort of philosophy of life. Definitely, if you're interested in this kind of thing, follow up, study Seneca, study these ideas that were propounded by the Stoics, and you'll find that there's an incredible amount that we can really be guided by in a totally ecumenical way. Really doesn't matter what your religious beliefs might be, what your personal philosophy might be, it'll be enriched by the understanding of Stoicism. Leo is much more about Epicureanism. It's about pleasure and hedonism, about seeking for all the comforts and joys of life. So there is an opposition there. There's something to consider. So where are things being shown up in my life where that requires some kind of thinking and adjustment, whether it be in my own experience or in the public sphere, and how I'm participating in that. So again, that Saturn is about control, this idea of control over things, or are we being controlled by? And so this is another question that we're grappling with at this Aquarius full moon. And we definitely suffer when we are feeling controlled or when we try to control things. So there's suffering that's created when things are not allowed to move forward with ease, with flow. When society is hyper-controlled, there's an enormous amount of suffering and breakdown. And so the paradox is that these ideas, these laws, these rules, these standards that are set to establish society are there somehow for our good, for our benefit, for the greater good of all. And of course, those are always the famous last words when a totalitarian or authoritarian ruler says, I'm doing this for your own good. That's what abusive parents tell children, what abusive partners tell their spouses. And that's something that we all must be alert to, be aware of. So we suffer when we try to control what is not in our control. We can't, for example, control what other people think or do or say. That's completely out of our control. But we absolutely can decide how we respond to this. And since Aquarius in modern times is very much about social networks and how we connect with people on these social networks, it's worth reflecting on that too. To where are we putting our energy? What is controlling us through social networks? And reflecting on all of those, both collectively and individually. So we can definitely change our response to what is happening. We don't need to react to how other people experience us, or how other people might talk about us or might do things around us. We simply have to control our own response to that. And one of the great ways to remember how to move forward is somebody else's opinion of you is none of your business. That's a great way of keeping that in mind, where you recognize, this is not my problem. It's more speaking about what they're going through than what I am actually dealing with. Of course, on the condition that we recognize the actions that we're undertaking and how they might affect other people. That comes back to the temperance aspect of Stoicism. And so we also can't control the weather or the climate. And we can't control how all of this is going to pan out. Of course, we can individually say, I don't have a car, or I don't travel much, or I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, or whatever that I'm doing, that small little part that I can help. But it's not sufficient to actually control what's going on around us. And we see this all around us with the flooding and the fires, the great fires that are happening in the last few years, which have consumed a lot of ancient forest and enormous amounts of property, consuming lives as well, human and other animal life, not to mention, of course, the greenery that we really need to stay alive on this planet, rather than packing up and going off to Mars and trying to figure it out there. We can't control all of that. So what is better is that we start to control our attitude to all of it. How are we going to respond if our house is under threat by flooding or fire? Can we already have a sense of what it is that we can do about that? So just to give you an example, if we look at this Aquarius full moon chart, it's just by coincidence that because I set it to where I live in Brussels, it's got a Cancer rising, and I happen to be a Cancer rising. And so this is happening in my 8th house, which is what we see here. Having said that, I don't want you to look at this as a specific meaning. If you are in Brussels, it could be a very particular meaning. And that's, by the way, where NATO and the European Union have their headquarters, so that can be construed for them as well. But Saturn and the moon in the 8th house is really about shedding expectations of what other people can provide for you. It's about letting go, about downsizing, about recognizing that we cannot necessarily rely on other people for support. And I can tell you, I've had this understanding because of the capacity to see going forward through astrology. I knew years ago that this would be coming up for me and very significant for me. And so I already started 3 years ago to get rid of a lot of my stuff. I downsized a lot of my things. Already it's my spiritual practice to practice non-attachment, to practice, allowing things to break and not worry about it, allowing things to move on, giving things away, not buying more stuff. And the fact that you become much more light, you literally physically become light when you have less stuff to take care of. You don't have to pay for upkeep or insurance or, worry about repairing things when you have less stuff. And so it is quite pleasant. It can be a really enriching way to live life. But anticipating that also allows me to say, well, if all of this burns down, I have already let go of it in my mind. And of course, you can be sad about losing photographs or losing objects that you may have acquired or certain things that have significance for you. But it doesn't mean that that's going to demolish you. You are not your house. You are not your car. You are not all of these things that you acquire and accumulate, including this body. So practicing non-attachment and letting go is a really powerful way of going through these times. So I'm speaking now about this full moon, but this full moon is a significator of our times. It's really speaking to what we're experiencing in these moments, 2022, and how this is shape-shifting our world and our society. And we certainly can't control the economy, if there is any such thing as the economy or a sense of an economy. So we can decide how we want to deal with money, how we want to deal with our stuff, our belongings. Like I said, I've shed a lot of things. I also went through a period where I was conned out of an enormous amount of money about 10, 11 years ago. It was, incredibly stressful, extremely difficult. And I recognized that it was something that I had a powerful moment of choice to determine, how am I going to live going forward through this? I can either collapse and fall apart and decide that that's everything and that's the end of story, or I can say it's actually never been true. It's never been real. None of that stuff has been real. So think for yourself, what would happen if you lost your pension, if you all of a sudden had to move out of your home, or you lost some investment, or money disappeared, or the value of your money disappeared, which, by the way, is happening to a lot of currencies. So this inflation, stagflation, that's affecting places like the UK, Turkey, and so on. There are countries that are undergoing intense economic pressures. How can we be, and who can we be through all of that intense pressure and change? We also can't affect how things might happen in terms of timing. Maybe our train is late, or we're running late, but we're stuck in traffic, or we're having to see the doctor, but we're waiting forever in the doctor's office, and we're running out of time because we have to go somewhere else. So that we can't really control. Other factors come in. Once you live in society, other aspects of life affect us too, including the timing of things. But we can definitely deal with how we behave around that. We don't need to get stressed and anxious. We don't need to get angry. Road rage comes from people being extremely self-centered and not thinking about all of these factors that they're not able to control. Believing that we can control everything outside of us is a source of suffering, and it causes suffering for people around us. They say that a true yogi actually never waits, that there's nothing to wait for. There's only this moment, that you're here in this moment. We're here and now. Saturn rules time. It's about the limitations of time. It's about restrictions based on time. It's the ultimate ruler of time, meaning death, the sense of that we have a limited amount of time physically in this body on this planet. And so when we understand that, time is short, life is short, we could disappear at any moment. Understanding that, we start to realize there's no point in wasting this time by being in a foul mood or blaming other people and stirring up trouble all around us, or feeling like we should be somewhere else when we're actually wherever we are and needing to be right there. The more present we are to whatever is happening, the more pleasant we can create an energy around us, both from our inner health, because our mental attitude creates our health. It changes our hormones, and also what it is that we'd like to share with others. So my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, always spoke about presenting yourself to others like a fresh flower. And the only way that we can do that is to really be pure inside, to clear our energy and to be at peace inside. It's not about faking it. It's not the Leo thing about wanting this to look like anything in particular. It's about really being that Leo energy of pure self-expression, which is coming from the heart. It's generosity, it's childlike, it's simple and loving, and has nothing to do with a narcissistic sense of, look at me being so good, or look at me being so patient, but actually underneath feeling the opposite. So yeah, this is where life is happening, folks. It's not necessarily pretty, but we have to make the most of it. If we feel powerless, if we are feeling ineffective or jealous, we feel resentful, we feel somehow miserable in the situation that we might be in, then it's because we're trying to control areas of our life that we simply can't control. So recognize that wherever you're feeling that energy of frustration and ineffectiveness or powerlessness, it's because you're pushing at the wrong door. You're trying to change something that is beyond your capacity to change. So turn that energy inwards, go inwards, and try to manage your expectations and your assessment and judgments of stuff. We don't know what we don't know. And this alone is a reason to stay humble. So avoid jumping to conclusions. It's helpful to anticipate obstacles as well. So if we think about what might go wrong, think about potentials, like I mentioned earlier, what would I do if my house is burning down? What would I do if I were subject to a flood or to some kind of natural disaster? That's just super powerful. I have no way of controlling that. How would I be? Who would I be in that moment? How could I be exactly in that moment so that I can bring the best out of the situation, make the best not only for myself, but for the people around me? And this is something that we can already anticipate and practice. And so it's this, in doing that, we can be just kind of in the flow. We can go riding through those winds of change and adversity in a way that is much more harmonious with what life is asking us in this moment. So even if there's turmoil around you, you can die in peace in that kind of chaos, because you're already bringing that to the situation. You're not struggling against the situation, but really saying, okay, this is what it is. This is, again, that idam namama, which is a Sanskrit mantra that I use to remind myself, this is not about my will, this is divine will, which is at play here. So catastrophic thinking, by the way, is not what I'm advocating here. So if you're focusing on catastrophizing, if you're focusing in on the things that are going wrong and the problems, that's not what I'm advocating here when I say that we can look at obstacles in advance and anticipate things going wrong. It's not about focusing on that. It's rather saying that I can look at the solutions for any eventuality and keep that growth mindset. I recently heard a clip from the Huberman lab podcast. I really like Professor Huberman. He has this really great podcast, and it's a story of told by one of his recent guests about Michael Phelps, who was a U.S. Olympic swimmer, and he was on the verge of winning his 8th gold medal at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And 8 in one Olympiad, not just in a lifetime, but in his very first ever show at the Olympics. And when he jumped in the water for this last 200-meter swim that he had to do, his goggles started filling up with water. And by the 3rd lap, he couldn't see anything. But because he had actually trained for this, he and his trainer had gone through adversity. What could possibly go wrong when you're in the competition zone, and things that could go wrong? Let's practice that. Let's work with this. Let's make it happen and go beyond it. So he was able to overcome this. There's no time when you're competing against the clock. There's no time to pause and adjust your goggles or even take some seconds to throw them off your head. He had to keep swimming, and he couldn't see anything by the 3rd lap. So all he started to do was what he was trained to do. He counted the strokes as he was going from lap to lap, and recognizing where he was by the end of the X number of strokes, he'd be at the end of the pool, and then he would have to turn around. And because he practiced for these terrible situations, he was calm. He knew how to overcome it, and he won the gold medal. So this is because he foresaw the problems, not because he's catastrophically obsessed with what could go wrong, but he's obsessed with the solutions. Who can I be in the face of adversity? And that allowed him to resolve the challenges in that moment. So we have to be realistic about what it is that we can actually change, and recognize, okay, when my goggles are full of water, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to resolve this? And this is kind of like the serenity prayer, that wonderful prayer, that at least it's the first half of this prayer, which is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can. And here's the kicker, here's the most important part, and the wisdom to know the difference. This is Viveka. Viveka is knowledge, it's wisdom, it's understanding, the higher sense of discernment. It's the actual symbol of Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, the swan, that is able to choose, able to discern water from milk and separate the two out. What's the milk? What's the good stuff that I want to take nourishment from, and the water we can leave behind? And these symbols are very powerful to recognize. This is where I really need to understand where I can let go of all these things that I can't possibly control, I can't possibly know. I let it go. I surrender it all. And this is what Saturn ultimately is teaching us in life: surrender. These are what the nodes are teaching us through life, particularly the South Node. What can you let go of? What can you shed? What can you drop right now? It's what you're moving away from. The North Node is what it is that I might have to deal with, that I can't possibly anticipate. It might be what we're craving and what we hope for, but that rarely pans out the way that we had expected it. If you think about your goals and dreams when you were a teenager, think of even years or decades later, how many of those actually panned out for you. So we have to be in this state of acceptance and flow to be able to really grow fully without resentment and without a feeling of being somehow cheated by life. So we don't have power to change so many things. We just need to change our relationship to what's going on. So just pushing harder or yelling louder is not going to bring you what you want. So focus inwards, practice equanimity, easy come, easy go. Practice contentment and gratitude as well, for your own good as well as that of others, because we know that biologically we thrive when we have these positive, constructive emotions. Our biology changes, and this is important to keep in mind. And then also we want to practice compassion, because not everybody is up to this. Not everybody is thinking this way. Not everybody is able, with what life has given them, to see and to have this discernment. And so we can just keep going forward in our way that practices all of these things, as a way of modeling that to other people, not preaching it to other people, but modeling that to other people, going with the flow, moving harmoniously through life, and recognizing that other people are needing perhaps more support, or maybe needing more space. And Aquarius is all about space. It's all about distance and setting oneself apart and having a bit more space between oneself and others. So there's an interesting also idea of non-interference that comes from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching that he wrote thousands of years ago as well. It's really ancient wisdom, which is timeless. It's human. It speaks to our capacity as human beings to navigate this world, which we think is so different, so different, but it's actually fundamentally the same. However, whatever era we're experiencing it in. And this idea of non-interference is very powerful. Lao Tzu says, just allow things to come and go. And don't think that, it's the ego that thinks we're responsible. We have to change this. We have to do something about this, or I don't like this, or I do like that. I want more of it. I want to grasp it. I want to hold on to it forever. So it's exhausting. We get up all kinds of ideas about holding on to stuff and trying to mold and shape things in the way that we want, according to our desires, which is again coming back to this Leo energy. And we just cannot do it. So we want to really recognize where that just causes problems. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so recognizing where we need to step back, where we need to allow things to happen, where we can be there and allow people to know we're here for you. We're here at a distance. We're here to support you when needed, but I have to wait for you to ask. So one way that we can help ourselves as well during our regular reflections or practice of mindfulness or meditation, if you've got one, which I highly recommend and encourage you to have, is to acknowledge your emotions, to really experience what it is that you're experiencing. Go through that in a time where you're at peace and recognizing certain things come up. They'll be there kind of just under the surface. Don't wait for yourself to be upset, or if you are upset, pull yourself away, separate yourself out in a way that is non-harming, non-violent, and says, I need to take care of myself right now. I'm just going to take some space and time and reflect on my emotions. Leo is all about passion. Not only do we have the sun there now, but Venus has just moved into the sign of Leo. So she's not at all conjunct, but in an in-sign conjunction along with the sun. And so Venus has just recently opposed Pluto, which is all about this expression of passion and intensity around emotion. And now with Venus in Leo, it's all about, what do I want? How do I want to be seen? Can I create this image of myself? Well, we want to go deeper. We want to be deeper than that and recognize that there is an emotional quality to all of these desires. There's something driving the desire. Go deep and understand, what is that? Like things that appear to be one way are not actually a result of that thing that we think it is. Like anger, for example, it's rooted in our sense of sadness, whatever we regret, what we wish could have happened. We're angry for other reasons besides the anger that we think we're feeling or that we sense is the predominant emotion. Go deeper than that till you figure it out. And then certainly don't project that onto others until you've really understood your own situation. Understand, this is what I'm experiencing. It is not a product of what is happening around me. It's my response, my choice. And we can't point fingers of blame at things that are going on around us. To practice living in harmony with nature and natural cycles as a way of balancing out these emotions, as a way of bringing yourself inner peace. If you move through life with this kind of flow, this cyclical flow of nature, it will really help you to find inner balance. So let's have a look now at the signs. So ignore the time and the location, etc., of this moon. I'm only using this as a guide for myself to see where all these things are while I describe the planets going through the houses. So here what we're seeing is Aries rising. Aries is lucky enough to have Jupiter in its sign, so a little bit of a buffer compared to other placements, I should think. So this is for Aries rising in particular, but it also applies to the sun and to a lesser extent to the moon. The rising sign shows you where things are happening much more sort of concretely in life, in the life centers that are shown by the houses. And if you're looking at it from the point of view of the sun, then that's also your personal wishes and hopes for your life, how you move through life, but it's also your career. Very interesting to reflect on that, about issues involving career, potentially also the father. And then the moon is about your emotional relationship to all of that, and potentially about your home or your mother. So if we look at Aries, then we see that triple conjunction was happening in the second house, and that is squaring the moon in the 11th house. So there's something here reflecting back friendships. It's talking also potentially about how you are hoping to move forward with your hopes and dreams and the things that it is that you'd like to achieve in life. We see the opposite, where the sun is in the house of children. And so there can be something with regards to children, which is stimulating this new way of looking at things, or this thing that needs to be reflected upon. And if it's not about children, then it can also be about your creative expression. So anything that is a creative baby for you, any kind of project, including entrepreneurship, which is very much in that 5th house. And since the triple conjunction was happening in your 2nd house of money, there could also be something to do with that. What do I do in business? How can I create some new buzz around what it is that I do? Or do I want to perhaps even start something new in business that would affect the bigger community? That can also be something to do with new networks, for example, where it is that things have been changing for you since March of 2020. Well, March of 2020, and on the 23rd of March, exactly when Saturn first went into that house. It did leave on the 1st of July, and then it came back into the 11th house a few months afterwards. So it's been there ever since December of 2020. So we've had this long time to grapple with this Saturn energy there, but now the moon is highlighting what it is that may have changed, what requires some changes for the Aries, at least in the house of friendships, and what it is that you want to expand into going forward through your hopes and dreams. It can be new ventures that are showing up and maybe showing you what needs to be modified or changed, or what it is that you might not have seen before that now you're seeing, and that allows you to take action. The South Node is in the 8th house, so shared resources. So it looks like some either issues that might come up with spousal income. Maybe there is some kind of income that you were counting on before. That can also be income coming in from business partners or clients. If you work as an independent, for example, that's your client money that comes in. 8th house can be around marriage as well. Maybe there's a change in marriage. There's something going on there that is affecting your friends and affecting your plans or affecting your children. So it can be a very interesting time for Aries to really explore all of these different connections, which are very much to do with the money axis, and then the axis of sort of creativity and how do I bring that out into the world. And so if we see Taurus on the ascendant, now we see Taurus is grappling with a very intense personal situation. I've had 3, just in the last 2 days, 3 Taurus risings. It seems like almost all of my clients at the moment are made up of people with strong fixed signs, but that's to be expected because previously it was all the cardinal signs coming when they were being hammered, but now it's the fixed signs being hammered. And so we see Taurus on the ascendant going through a massive change in all the principal areas of life. And this full moon is really highlighting that. So in particular, this full moon is in the 10th house of work, your career, your social status. So something's being highlighted there. These, by the way, are not necessarily negative. It's just something that's coming up, and it can be something. I mean, a couple of the people I've seen have had some fantastic opportunities and really exciting things happen. And a couple have been going through real, genuine suffering and real incredible tension. And that really depends on your individual chart. And it also depends on the stage of life that you're in. So some people are having this coupled with the midlife crisis. Like if you've got your Uranus in Scorpio, this is all full-on midlife crisis stuff. So you're born in the early 80s, for example, then that would be you. It's intense. It's even more intense. And then others, it's not at all that case. And it's really about something new and bright coming into the house of what you put out in the world. That can be your career, it can be your social status, it can include, for example, marriage. Something is highlighting a marriage opportunity or showing you where a relationship needs to dissolve potentially. With Venus and the Sun in the fourth house, this is actually an opportunity for you to really become clear in terms of your own security, what makes you feel secure. The fourth house is about what makes us feel emotionally secure, financially secure, materially secure. That might be something that requires an assessment, or that's something that's being highlighted by how this impact of the 10th house is changing your life at this moment. Looks also like that could also be something to do with an actual physical home. So maybe there's something to do with where do I live? How do I live in the space that I'm living in? And just what's generally going on at home. But I think in that case, it can be something quite pleasant. Venus going through the fourth house is usually a very pleasant experience. The Sun is right at home in the fourth house in Leo for a Taurus ascendant. And so that also can bring out the best there. Although there has been this long-term impact from Saturn opposing all of that. So there's some adjustment to that, no doubt. Potentially also right now feeling a certain amount of isolation or a feeling of having to go things on your own in terms of how you step out in the world. Again, that can be different depending on the individual. Maybe it's that you're having to embark on a new career path and feeling a little bit nervous about that, or it could be also about being in a different relationship status and having that make you feel a little bit isolated or cut off or a little unsure of yourself. Saturn and the Moon together bring out this potential for emotional, potentially, as bad as depression or feeling of real sense of having to fall back on your own resources and not being sure about whether that's possible. The fixed signs don't like change. So that's, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius are resistant to change anyway. And this is exactly where all this change is being required. So take it slowly, have compassion for yourself, and recognize that, this is going to be for the better ultimately, even if things on the surface don't look like what you'd hoped that they would. Certainly on some level, you're shedding, if it's not actual relationships and partnerships, then you're actually shedding ways of being in them. It might be literally saying goodbye to some very valued friends and relationships, even life partners. Or it can be that you're changing so much yourself that your experience of relationship is actually quite different. And so that's not such a bad thing for Taurus. And then we see Gemini on the ascendant. And then for Geminis, we see that the full moon is happening in the 9th house of foreign lands, of higher philosophy. This is what I call the house of Dharma. This is sometimes known as the road to God. It's where we take ideas that are bigger than just ourselves. It's where we understand through knowledge and wisdom what we believe. It can be something to do with understanding how your philosophy of life might be changing. And it can also be, concretely where you're experiencing changes with higher education or connections with other people. That can also be if you're doing business with foreign lands and foreigners. We see that both the 12th house and the 9th house, which is very much about foreign lands, faraway places, are affected very strongly there. So issues that might come up around business or transactions either in foreign lands or dealing with foreigners can be significant around this time. That can also be something to do with education. So if you're young enough or young at heart enough to be doing higher education of some kind, there can be a decision that needs to be taken around what avenues to take. What do I want to do? How do I want to move forward with this? And that can be something that's quite enriching. So for Gemini, I'm not sure that this is as stressful as it can be for other signs. Gemini is anyway quite adaptable. And so you now have the Sun and Venus in your third house of skills and communication. It's a nice place to have Venus because it shows harmony in your community and with the people around you. And in traveling, if you do some short trips, that's a great time to do that with Venus there. With Saturn and the moon up there in the ninth, if you're traveling to faraway places, or that can be pilgrimages as well, that can also be something that might have been challenging. There may have been some obstacles there. You had this triple conjunction in your 12th house. 12th house is very, very much everything that's hidden from the eyes. It's either far away or something that's not seen because we keep it private. It's the house of bed pleasures as well. So things might be changing there for you, that there can be some interesting developments in your sex life, or it can also be issues around sleep. And so disruption to sleep is there. Gemini tends to be a sign that often is plagued by nervous disorders or sort of things that might affect the deeper psychology because of a lot of thinking, a lot of busyness. A bit too much busyness can really run them down. So this can also have a bearing on your health because it is that health axis as well. The 6th house, 12th house axis is about our physical health and our psychological health. 12th house can be also issues around confinement. For whatever reason, it can be, unwillingly or willingly confined, whether it be to hospital or prison or going to an ashram and a retreat that we actually choose to go to, for example. And so issues like that may have affected you and affected your capacity to make progress. And that has caused you to revise your attitudes to things or revise what it was that you thought might be possible, and perhaps change your sense of direction in life. 9th house is also our sense of higher purpose, what it is that we want to do. That's the dharma aspect of it. It's not only the dharma and the aspect of law, divine law, but it's also the aspect of what's my role here. And perhaps that's been under examination or re-examination for Geminis. 6th house is being affected by Ketu, the south node, which is saying, something that needs to change. If this is a health habit or some kind of daily schedule, daily rhythm or work, just the mundane drudgery, the stuff that we've got to do all the time, maybe something is changing there. Maybe you're deciding that needs to change, or maybe it's being changed and you're having to then respond to that change. Either way, if Ketu is in that house, then it looks like potential health issues can actually be resolved. They can be shared in time. Again, that depends on your chart, and so don't go off worrying that now you're having health issues if you're a Gemini. So Cancer rising. I already briefly mentioned earlier that Cancer rising this is happening in your 8th house. And this is affecting you very strongly in terms of your notions around income and money, resources around, what is possible for you now. Something since early 2020, since March 2020, has changed in terms of your income, what might be coming from other sources of money that can be in terms of inheritance, for example, or government payouts. Things like that can have been delayed or restricted or held back. Another thing that's going on there is potentially around dealing with fears. When Saturn, anyways, in Aquarius in the 8th house, this is about our sense of sort of existential angst. In Aquarius, it's around what we experience through society. Certainly, that's been the theme since March 2020. And when the moon is there, it's now highlighting potentially any of those things that might be coming up in terms of what it is that I'm afraid of, and has that had maybe an effect of holding me back, or is there something in my emotional or psychological sort of processing or belief system or sense of identity that's actually holding me back, and how can I overcome that? And so on the opposite end of that, we see that the Sun and now Venus are in the house of money and wealth, and so it looks like this question is going to be resolved in some way that allows you to go forward a little more positively. So Venus is in Leo, in the sign of Leo, until the 5th of September. So there's a bit of time to enjoy, 3 weeks or so, to enjoy Venus's boost to the second house after some serious drudgery and challenge to at least collective finances or shared finances over the last couple of years. And then the North Node, or Rahu, is still conjunct Uranus. It's no longer conjunct Mars, but Mars, of course, is still there in the 11th house of hopes and dreams and friendships and groups. And this is expanding all of that. It's changing all of that. So there's something that is changing. Perhaps our sense of direction, our hopes and our plans, our aspirations for life have had to be revised, or there's new ideas that come in, new ways of expressing that, new groups within which we can express that as well. And then the opposite end of that is our creativity, shedding perhaps habits or hobbies or ways of spending time or wasting time, depending on how you look at it, that need to be let go of so that we can move in this new direction. Or it can also be areas around children or some other expression of creativity, changing things up with regards to business, for example. That's another way that this could look. So interesting times for Cancer. It seems it's also the positive boost comes from Jupiter, which is in the 10th house. And so it seems that with Aries, with Jupiter in Aries and then with Venus in Leo soon to trine, the money story is looking a little bit more positive for Cancers than it has been for a while. So if that's you, hang in there. I'm right with you. And so then we look at Leo. Leo, this is part of your moment. This is obviously your month to shine because your sun is there in the first house. If it's your ascendant, it's definitely first house. If it's your sun, we consider that the first solar house. And then Leo, you're being joined now by Venus, which is going to come and bring some bling into your life for the next 3 weeks or so, till the 5th of September. So this opposition is happening in the axis of self and others. So this is really something that you're being highlighted or shown, or some kind of culmination in relationship that again has been testing you for the last 2.5 years almost. And it's not news to you. It's just that this is now showing you something that you want to step into, that you want to understand more fully. So when you see that moon there across from the Leo sun, you want to understand perhaps the perspective of others, what's happening in the life of the other business partner, your life partner, a very important other person. This is also paradoxically the house of hidden enemies. And so it's open enemies. Sorry, not hidden enemies. It's the ones that we know. Is your partner sitting across the table? Is the person that might be what you could consider the opposition. And so, take that for what it's worth. And so you might find that actually you're starting to realize where certain people in your life have actually been holding you back, or have done something that has caused you some kind of challenging situation or difficulty, or that has cost you a sense of self and individuality. So know that this is a testing time, that if your relationship goes through these times, especially since March of 2020 and then going forward till March of 2023, if your relationship survives this, it's really solid, it's really good. Same thing with a business partnership. So this is highlighting something that might be needing your attention, needing adjustment, needing to be noticed in that regard. Leo, you also have quite a lot going on in your house of career. You've had that triple conjunction there. That could also be your status. It's your potentially your marital status as well. Am I single? Am I married? Etc. And that's showing up very strongly for you already because Uranus has been there for 4 years, but with the North Node there conjunct, it's now really calling your attention since January when the North Node moved in there, and it will continue until July 2023. So you've got this big period of time to reassess yourself, your role in relationship, your status, your social status, how you show up in the world. And then something about that is changing through your house and home, or your sense of sort of psychology, your inner nature, your emotional nature, for example, is there in the fourth house. And so that's moving away. Maybe your attention is moving away from all of that towards how to express yourself out in the world. Or maybe there's a sense of shedding aspects of yourself, or even where you live, and deciding that you want to move. That will really depend on what your chart looks like, and certainly where your specific ascendant degree is and the angles of your chart. But that's something that you might be considering as well. When we see Virgo on the ascendant, then we can see that this full moon is happening in the 6th house, which is a comfortable place for Virgo. It's where you rule naturally. Virgo owns the 6th house, as it were. And so Saturn and the moon there is showing you something about your regular sort of habits and how they might be supporting you, health and illness issues. If there have been any since March of 2020, you will know it by now, and you will be able to deal with that. That may have been something that has held you back. I know many Virgo clients and Virgos that I know have had health scares and health issues that have held them back to a greater or lesser extent, depending on what the issue was. And this is something that is being highlighted now in terms of how do you live your life? How are you perhaps affecting that health or illness? Is your daily schedule working well for you, or does that need some kind of adjustment? So pay attention to that, because this is something that makes all the difference in terms of our health and well-being. That can also be something that you might be noticing in terms of self-sabotage, because there we have the Sun in Leo and Venus there moving into Leo. That's now referring to that house of self-undoing. It's how we might be the cause of our own worst, be our own worst enemy, be the cause of our own nightmares, and that is also potentially putting an emphasis on faraway places or people in faraway lands, and issues of dealing with foreigners, or dealing with places that are far away. And so this can also be, maybe it's about, do I take a job that is far away and that will affect my daily life? And that's where that moon is highlighting, okay, this is what that's going to look like if you connect with these people from far away, if you decide to move abroad, or if you want to take this opportunity abroad, this is what that will look like. You've had that triple conjunction in your 9th house of higher learning, higher philosophy. And so that has given you a lot of food for thought. That is something that provides you a new perspective on life, potentially also a new sense of purpose, a higher purpose to life. That can be quite unexpected. It can be something kind of out of the blue, or it can be something that's has been building over a few years, since 2018. And then that can affect your higher learning as well. If you're a student or just a constant learner like myself, this can also affect a sense of direction and purpose in that regard, and perhaps having a sense of wanting to study more, or realizing you've done enough and now it's time to move on to other things. That is opposing your 3rd house of community and neighbors and cousins as well, and communication. And so maybe you're realizing that there's, with Ketu there, with the South Node there, there's maybe something that needed to be changed around where do I live in terms of community, or who do I spend time with? Or it can be something to do with maybe moving away from a way of communicating, realizing that that hasn't really been helping up until this point, or that maybe you've been communicating in a way that's either not been empowered or has been too critical or too judgmental. That is an aspect of Virgo. One of the reasons that Virgo has such a reputation for being, fussy and sharp or harsh with their language is because that third house is ruled by Scorpio, therefore Mars. And so that's where that sting comes from. It's this hyper criticism, hyper judgment. If that's the case, whether it's towards yourself or towards others, this is perhaps a time where you're realizing that, and you can let that go. You can drop it and move on from that way of experiencing relationships and communications with people. And then we see Libra on the ascendant. And so when Libra is on the ascendant, you've now got this moon in your fifth house of creative expression. Again, ignore all the times and so on. This is no longer exact at the moon. I'm just using this for my guide. And so we see that the degree points are no longer corresponding, but just ignore it. And we're going to look at the context instead. And so we see that you had this moon happening in your fifth house. And with the moon in the fifth house, we see there, again, this emphasis on potentially children. It can be about something that's going on that in terms of your children's life or the younger people in your life that you might be responsible for. This can also be about just self-expression and enjoyment. And, have you been able to do that with Saturn moving through that part of the chart since early 2020? That's not been super easy for you. Saturn moving through the fifth can often be a time of feeling really constrained, really held back, not being able to fully experience love and kind of a joie de vivre that is usually more accessible to a Libra type. And then, so it can also be with regards to the lives of your children, maybe something in your child's life or the lives of those people around you that you're caring for. That might be their issues, but you're concerned about that, or somehow it involves you. This can also be again about business. So it's about self-employment or entrepreneurship, for example. So there may be something there that's coming to light, that this is being reflected now at this time. It's like, now I get it. I need to do this, or this is coming to a head, and I need to resolve this. This is a cycle that has been playing out again and again for the last two and a bit years. So may not be new, but it's something that's coming to light right now. That can also be just purely hobbies and creativity, and recognizing, okay, now I've been feeling so down lately. Now I realize I need to actually do something, make something happen so that I can express myself. I can do something more creative and really shed this feeling of restriction that I might have in terms of my capacity to just simply enjoy life. On the other hand, this can be coming through your network. So you're seeing there's some root to this is coming through the people you associate with, your friends and acquaintances, groups that you, whether professional or social groups that you spend time with. There's something there that might be affected by this, or actually be partly affecting this situation. Whatever it is, it looks like Venus is now coming in to improve that and to bring you some benefit. And so if the situation that you're in could benefit from the support of friends, or advice coming from networks, or the support of networks, or a sense of needing to meet people, get your friends on it. Use those networks in a constructive way. Make your apply your usual charms, the way you're so good at doing. Venus is your ruler, and so Venus in the 11th is also a really brilliant time for you. So this moon might be just highlighting something of a glitch, something that needs to be resolved, and now you can move on and really take advantage of the next 3 weeks. Something's been brewing in the 8th house for you. That's where the triple conjunction was, in the 8th house, where the North Node is now with Uranus. And that may have been something to do with spouse, or again, shared income, shared belongings, whatever resources you share with another. Some issues have come up around that are potentially disturbing or disruptive in your life, that can be happening in your spouse's life or in your partner's life. It's not really your situation, but it's affecting you. That's one way that can look. But of course, if you're married, whatever's going on with your partner will definitely affect you. But this can also be directly affecting you through something like an inheritance or income sources that are drying up or changing in some way compared to what you were used to. Some kind of shift in values is there as well. We see that very strongly, that there's a change in potentially money, assets, whatever you value, including your own self-worth. And so it's definitely something that you're shedding. And so perhaps it might be helpful that there's this need to recognize where you need to change your relationship to money or change your relationship to spending. That I know some Librans who are pretty high spenders, and so maybe it's that. Maybe there's something there which is about changing your relationship to the value of money and your own value as well, and that can help you go through this with your usual grace. And then we can see Scorpio. Scorpio, you, much like Taurus, are in the thick of this because of this triple conjunction happening very powerfully in your axis of self and others. This full moon is squaring that. And so whatever was going on for you last week, but probably more like 2 weeks ago, so the end of July, beginning of August, very powerfully, when this triple conjunction took place, that's something that's going to be showing up for you, particularly in your relationships, in the way that you relate to people, in what you value in relationships, and also potentially bringing in a sudden, unexpected change. With Mars there, that often can mean a rupture or a severance, some kind of shift away from something. Mars represents cutting, separation, and so on. Uranus is about something very different, very new, unexpected happening. And the North Node means, again, that same kind of thing, is something new coming in. So that's all being triggered by this moon, which is happening in the 4th house. And that moon in the 4th house, the full moon, so close to Saturn, is really about something that might be constraining you in terms of where you live, or in terms of the quality of stability or security you might be feeling, that there's some foundation that requires your attention, whether that's your personal sort of psychological and emotional foundation, or is it the actual home that you live in that requires some kind of thought and attention. And or maybe it's just the comings and goings around home that are requiring your attention, and there may be some kind of sense of obligation or restriction or burden, or a change of some kind that is required around that. And then what seems to be shining and can actually benefit a lot at this time is your career. So it's something to do with the career can be really strongly highlighted as well. So while the 4th house is being illuminated, the house of career is the one doing the illuminating. And so we can't separate out the two. And so this might be something to do, again, with your social status, or with work and career in some way. Venus being there now, just having ingressed the sign of Leo at the time of this full moon is significant, even if she doesn't conjunct the moon or the sun. And so there's some very, I think, positive development potentially for Scorpios in the house of career and status. So Sagittarius, this is happening in your 3rd house of groups and associations. It's where you hang out. It's the environment that you are in. And this is something that might bring your attention to something that needs to change in that regard. It can be around communication as well. It could be siblings, especially younger siblings. And it could be, for example, something to do with the internet, or the way that you communicate, or needing to deal with something on a practical level. This is also the house of commerce and skills So this also can be affecting you if you're interested in business, being self-employed, for example, or being an entrepreneur. This can be affecting you as well. The opposite end of that is the ninth house, which is your house of higher learning. And so it's that's what's doing the illuminating. And so it could be that there's some kind of a sense of the shift that is necessary. What is becoming highlighted in terms of communication is founded in your sense of higher purpose and higher philosophy of life. And then with Venus there, that's quite constructive. It can be something to do with travel as well, something to do with moving around and traveling that may not be going as you planned, may not be working out in the same way, or may require more effort on your part. And so when you have, when you have the third and ninth house activated, we can see usually a lot of movement, a lot of busyness. With Sagittarius rising, that's pretty par for the course anyway, but particularly now, that can be also about education and learning, whether it be practical skills that might need honing, might need some kind of attention, or whether it be higher learning that you're reflecting on, or just a higher philosophy of life that you're looking at, that's illuminating all of this at this time. Certainly your everyday life is changing quite dramatically. And we see the triple conjunction has happened in your sixth house. And that is everyday life. It's the day-to-day work. It's how you do your thing. It's about habits as well. It's about how you take care of yourself and issues around illness. And so there can be, again, this would be dependent on your chart. It's not generalized for all Sagittarius moon, sun rising people. It's potentially there can have been health issues that have brought something to the fore, or there can have been issues around an accident. Mars, when it's in what's called the Dusthana houses, the houses of challenge, when Mars is there, we can sometimes get involved in accidents or some kind of thing, an event that is challenging us to go through our day-to-day life with ease. And so that's something that may require your attention. And otherwise, it may be as simple as you deciding, I am going to change it up. I'm going to improve my diet. I'm going to improve my lifestyle. I'm going to make a change so that I can improve my mental and physical health. Something from the 12th house, which I mentioned earlier, is about the house of self-undoing potentially, or things that are hidden. It's things that are not obvious to everybody around us. That might be a very private experience of something that is going away. So perhaps you're learning how to shed an old habit, or something that's undermining your well-being. That can also be shedding literal plans for going abroad, or changing plans going abroad, or working with foreigners, or experiencing some kind of connection with foreigners, because again, you're one of these signs that is being affected both in the 9th and 12th houses, which are about faraway lands and people. So when we see Capricorn on the ascendant, now we see this is a lot about money. Money issues have been featuring quite prominently, very strongly for Capricorn for the last 2.5 years or so. And I mean, to a certain extent, Capricorn is quite concerned with money. You're one of the earth houses, and so that's earth signs rather. And so that's also part of your karma, to be here and to be handling the material stuff of life, along with Taurus, for example, and Virgo. And so this is also part of who you are. So it may not be super upsetting. And also, given that Saturn rules your sign, you won't be too uncomfortable with the demands put upon you by Saturn. In the second house, there may be some issue around how you're spending money, or the money that you have, or some perhaps issues around the value of stuff that you have. It can be whether that be stocks and bonds, or the income that you're earning, or the possessions that you have. That is potentially showing up here right now, what it is that needs attention. The second house is also family, and it's whatever supports you. So second house is also quite literally what you put in your mouth. It's like, food and drink and so on. So maybe that's also something that has required some attention. It may be that now you're realizing that that needs to be revised, that there's maybe issues around health that are showing up that require your attention in such a way that you don't undermine your health through the way you're eating or drinking or consuming drugs of any kind, for prescription or otherwise. And then, of course, then we see the opposite end of that is the eighth house, with the reflection coming from the sun in Leo in the eighth, and then now Venus stepping in there. That could be that your spouse is onto something new in terms of money, that there's some kind of new benefit coming through your spouse. There's something highlighted in any regard with that house of shared resources. So there's some kind of conversations coming up. Looks quite good, actually, because this is Leo ruling. The sun ruling Leo is quite powerful there, so will bring good benefits. It'll bring something quite positive potentially, and then of course Venus, being a benefic, can also bring something quite interesting and positive. So it could be that your spouse is getting a new job or a pay rise or some kind of improved situation that also reflects on you. So big changes in your house of children, in your house of creativity, potentially if you're self-employed, for example, or running your own business, then this is something that would show dramatic new starts or something big changing there. Children moving off to college. I know a couple of Capricorns who are experiencing that, and then there's now the empty nest syndrome. And then grappling with that, because now that, of course, is affecting you in the way that you live your day-to-day life. And so that sense of what is possible now, how can I find something new in that area of life, which is self-expression? Who can I decide that I want to be in this new circumstance that is now including children, no longer needing my fullest attention, for example, or there's something happening in the lives of children or in your creative expression that is dramatically new and different and unexpected. And then the opposite end of that is the 11th house, potentially recognizing where goals or dreams and hopes have kind of met their expiry date, and maybe you're needing to revise that. South Node usually is moving away from something, so it's about shifting goals, recognizing where that needs revision, where certain things that held an appeal for some time no longer really matter anymore, and you can let that go. And then seeing also where potentially maybe there's also networks of friends or networks of acquaintances or political groups or social groups that you might have belonged to are no longer really nourishing, no longer really interesting for you, so you're letting that go. That can also be in the 11th house, about a sense of wanting to be recognized for certain things, and that might be that, again, that's that sense of needing recognition for things is moving on, and that can come with the Saturn Moon conjunction in your second house of self-worth. Maybe you're starting to realize I can actually pat myself on the back. I don't need the constant approval of others, for example. And so we're seeing now Aquarius on the ascendant, and with Aquarius on the ascendant, we have this full moon happening in your house of self. So this is very much your moon, Aquarius. You usually get one a year. This is a reflection of the new moon that you would have had around the 1st of February of this year. And when we see that you've already had anyway Saturn going through your house, you already had Saturn also through the 12th house. So for basically 4 years now, you've had Saturn in a particularly intense place in the chart. And so Saturn is now moving through your house of self. You're reorganizing your sense of identity and self already since early 2020. And now the moon is kind of highlighting this. It's like it's coming around again. Each time something goes through Leo, this happens. Or any time something goes through the fixed signs, this happens. But it's particularly highlighted now at this particular time where you're experiencing this sense of potential personal revision, or a sense of what is coming back at you, what's being reflected back at you from others, kind of how am I doing in this new version of myself, or what it is that I hope to express in my life. This is also your physical body. So if there have been any issues around health or things holding you back, or even a potential feeling of depression, could have been depression, a sense of, not being able to be fully yourself for whatever reason. That might be highlighted here. You get a new understanding about that, something that you can deal with. And it won't be as bad for you as it might be for other signs, given that Saturn is your ruler. And so you're accustomed to this energy that might have you feeling a little bit isolated or separated out, having to step aside and be a little bit on the margins of things for a while, and until you get yourself figured out and how it is that you want to present yourself to the world. We see all of that reflected from the house of relationships. So this axis of self and relationship is hugely important for you right now. It has been for the last 2 and a bit years, but very, very significant now, where you're seeing this energy of Leo really shining a light on relationships. What do you want in relationships? How is that working for you? Who is in your life as well? And now with Venus there, that can be some real harmony there, some really good times, real grace in relationships. That may not have been so easy at certain times up until now. We see also the triple conjunction was happening in your 4th house, and triple conjunction in the 4th house is showing that again, this could be your deeper psychology that has been really changing, really highlighted in the last few weeks, and will continue to be so very much until October. A lot of emphasis also on the actual home, how you're feeling about things. There's quite a lot of shaking up in the foundations of your life. Could be literally, where do I live? Where do I want to live? Often when Saturn is moving through the 1st house or any of the angular houses, 1, 4, 7, 10, there can be this question of where do I live? So this could also, like I said, for Leos as well, or Scorpio and Taurians, this is also a question. So these are big life questions that are being asked right now. The opposite end of that is potentially, what am I doing with my life socially? How am I contributing? And that's changing. Something there is changing. That can be a sense of status or a role that you had up until now that's changing or no longer interesting to you. And you're bringing your focus inwards, or you're bringing your focus towards home. The 4th house also involves family and parents. So it might also have something to do with your family or your lineage, your ancestry, the people around you that might need your attention. And that's causing you then to feel the restriction on yourself because you're having to put your attention on perhaps, elderly parents or ailing parents, for example. And finally, when Pisces is on the ascendant, now ignore again the fact that the moon is no longer in Aquarius. We're still talking about this Aquarius full moon. It's just that the chart has shifted to give me the ascendant. I'm using that only for my own reference. So I apologize if that's confusing for the rest of you. It helps me have this thing that I can use as a visual aid to speak with. And so we're seeing this for Pisces is happening in the 6th and 12th house axis. So the moon was in the 12th house and opposing the sun in the 6th house. So this is also the axis of health. That is something that was also illuminated for Virgos, but in the opposite way. So again, for Pisces, this can be a question of, what am I doing every day? What are my habits? And how is my day-to-day work affecting my life? And there can be some restriction potentially around things that are not so clear. That can be issues around our deeper sense of spiritual life or psychology, or a sense of, sort of what is behind the eyes, all of the stuff that we don't see. Our private life may be feeling a little bit flat or restricted. Issues from far away or foreigners, foreign lands can also be a source of concern or needing to be dealt with, or in some way they're highlighted by this moon. And so this is an interesting time for Pisces to become more clear about the sort of day-to-day stuff. What are you doing with day-to-day life that might support you or otherwise? So it's not going to show up probably terribly dramatically on the surface of things to other people, but I think you'll be feeling this in terms of how you feel as you glide through your day, as you swim through the day-to-day stuff in your little Piscean way. And then The third house, ninth house axis is very important for you because of that triple conjunction, which is squaring all of this. And so that tension can be coming through issues around skills, developing skill sets, new ways of communicating, ways of getting around. This can also be about your vehicles and how you actually commute or move around day to day. There can be some big changes there for some Pisces, especially Pisces rising. And the third house is also siblings, younger siblings in particular. Older siblings tend to be seen in the 11th house. And this can be about your neighbors, your community. The way that you participate in that is changing. And so a decision that you may have made around community or around how you're participating in all of that, or in how you're learning skills, how you want to employ new skills, or a desire or a need, being forced to learn new skills, is somehow part of this tension that's here at the full moon, that's highlighting your sense of maybe well-being or capacity. With Saturn in the 12th, there can be some shadows of self-doubt as well that might be there. And then of course the opposite end of that with K2 in the 9th house, the South Node in the 9th house is suggesting that there's some aspects of belief or a sense of purpose that might need revision. It might be a time for you to recognize, okay, that actually needs to be changed, let go of. It's not really what I'm here for anymore, or I thought it was going to be like this, and now I really see that life is showing up for me this way. And so having your natural sense of flexibility will help you with this. This axis is also the axis of travel, so both travel and learning in some way are highlighted here for Pisces. It seems that the message is to become more practical, be more established in the day-to-day, rather than in the highlighting the philosophical side of life, or this sense of, what a sort of dreamy or perhaps more spiritual or religious sense of life. Get back to basics and be more practical, which is not always natural for Pisces to do. So thanks for sticking it out. If you've come this far with me, thanks for being here still. And I look forward to catching up with you in the next video. Good luck with all of this and much love to all of you.